Today in our FairTalks, we're sitting down with Silja Zimmermann, a PhD candidate at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development and the Center for Complex System Studies for the project Tipping the Iceberg, leveraging a food transition for indigenous communities in the Bering Sea. With extensive field experience in Arctic regions, Silja's passion for environmental justice transcends academia. When she's not researching Arctic indigenous food systems, she's on the front lines, advocating for positive change as a Greenpeace activist. In our chat, you'll gain a deeper understanding of the local food system on St. Paul Island in Alaska and the challenges facing its Indigenous Unangax or Aleut community. How does food get there? What sustains the community? How can scientific research be translated into everyday language? All that and more in this episode of FairTalks. Hello, Silja.
Hi.
I'm very excited to have you on one of our FairTalks. I don't want to talk much about you because you're here to talk for yourself. Can you tell us a bit about who you are and what you do and your research in the Arctic?
Sure. My name is Silja Zimmermann. I'm a PhD candidate at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And in my research, I work on Arctic Indigenous food security. So I work together with an indigenous community on St. Paul Island in Alaska. And the community there, they experience a lot of very complex challenges in their food system, very high food insecurity rates. And we're trying to find some solutions for them, with them.
St. Paul Island sounds like a very remote place. Have you been there before? Did you go and actually spend time there to do your research?
Yeah, well, I have to admit, when I first heard about the place, I didn't know where it was either. But maybe I can explain a little bit where it is on the map. So you can imagine Alaska, and then you have the Aleutian chain, a chain of islands going all the way westwards to Asia. And north of that is the Bering Sea. And pretty much in the middle of the Bering Sea, there are the Pribilof Islands, which is a group of 5 islands. 3 of them are uninhabited, and 2 of them are St. Paul Island and St. George Island. On St. George Island, you have a really small community of, I think it's 50 people.
Wow.
And on St. Paul, where I work, it's about 300 people who live there. Yeah.
And why the Arctic? How did you end up focusing your research on the Arctic?
I think it all started actually when I was in my bachelor program. So I studied geography at the University of Bonn in Germany in my bachelor program. And then in the 3rd semester, I did an Erasmus exchange semester to Reykjavik in Iceland. And there I just fell in love with the Arctic. And since then, I always try to focus on climate change, different challenges in Arctic social ecological systems. I think there are many reasons why I love the Arctic so much, or also why I think it's such an interesting place for research, because, what happens in the Arctic sometimes seems so distant for us here. It's this really far away, remote place, where some people don't even know what is it. Like, it's so roughly defined, what is the Arctic? But for example, when you think about the global climate system, the Arctic plays such a crucial role also for our climate here. And for example, climate change, the effects of climate change are already felt so much more in the Arctic than they are being felt here. And I think it's a really important and interesting place to study.
Yeah, definitely. And when you went there, how long did you stay, and what did you realize are these communities facing in terms of food insecurity? What does it look like in their reality, in their day-to-day life?
I went there twice so far. So in my research project, I'm really trying to spend as much time there as I can, or at least enough time to really get to know the community, work together with them, and know what it's like to be there. Last year, I've been there 3 months. In the spring, well, it was still pretty cold. I wouldn't call it spring, but it was like March, April, May. And then this year, I've been there for 2 months in August and September. And next year I will go back in July. So I'm really trying to be there also throughout different times of the year, because indigenous food systems in the Arctic are by nature pretty seasonal. So what people eat, what activities they do really depends on the season they're in. So I'm trying to be there throughout different times of the year. And what is typical for contemporary indigenous food systems in the Arctic is that they all often have a mixed food system of subsistence foods and store-bought foods. And that's also the case for the community that I work with. So they have a local store, the Aleut community store. Aleut is the name of the indigenous community there, the original word is Unangan. You can buy there pretty much everything that you would also find at a local store, just not as many vegetables, not as much fresh produce, but they have canned foods, pasta, everything. And you would also find that it is incredibly expensive, which is also one of the main food security challenges that people are facing there, because food prices are really, really, really high. I don't know, maybe to give you an example, a can of tomatoes would cost $9.
Yeah, but especially, obviously, as you said, since it's so remote and the temperatures are really low there, I can imagine food getting there is like quite a hassle. What other foods do they rely on? Because obviously buying in the supermarket is not very feasible for them, I'm imagining. So what do they usually eat then?
Yeah, so that's why it's called a mixed food system. On the one hand, they have this store, and although it's super expensive, a lot of people rely on the store. And then the other half of the food system would be the subsistence foods, the traditional local foods that people gather from the land and from the sea. So St. Paul Island actually has the largest northern fur seal population in the world. And they used to hunt the northern fur seals commercially until it was forbidden, but now they still hunt it for subsistence purposes. So in July, that's also why I'm excited to go there next year in July. They have a community seal harvest where the community comes together and hunts the seals.
Okay.
Yeah, but there are also other subsistence food sources. For example, there is a local reindeer herd. So people hunt reindeer. They do a lot of subsistence fishing for halibut, for example, and also for crab. Yeah, so like I said earlier, they have this mixed food system with the Aleut community store on the one hand and the subsistence food sources on the other hand. And in terms of the Aleut community store, I would say that the biggest problem is really the high food prices. And that is, for example, the main reason for this is because it is so expensive to ship food out there. But there are other problems related to the store. For example, very often the food, by the time it gets there, it's already moldy. Because the small planes that bring in the food, if the weather is bad, if there's fog or anything, they just don't make it in. And when we think about the other side of the food system and the subsistence resources, I would say that the biggest two problems are the effects of climate change and the effects of overfishing. Because the Bering Sea is one of the most productive seas in the world, and there's a lot of fishing that is done there, and not always with a very sustainable fishing method. So, for example, there's a lot of bottom trawling, mid-water trawling, especially for the pollock fishing industry. Pollock are these small fish that are, for example, used, when you go into the supermarket and you buy fish fingers and all these frozen cheap fish products, pollock is what's mostly in there. And they are being overfished The problem is just that not only humans like pollock, but also seals. Yeah, now it just happens that they don't find enough food to eat anymore, and so their populations are declining. And of course, also a lot of bycatch is going into the nets of these huge trawlers. So it's not only that they fish the species they target, but pretty much everything that gets into the net is being pulled out of the ocean, and that's so destructive. And another problem I shouldn't forget is, well, the history of the community is really long and complex. Originally, the community isn't from the Pribilof Islands, but they were from the Aleutian chain. And in 1800 something, Russian colonizers enslaved people from the Aleutian chain and brought them to the Pribilof Islands, to St. Paul and St. George. And there they enslaved them for the commercial fur seal harvest.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so first the Russians colonized the community, and then later, when the US bought Alaska from Russia, the US American government colonized the people. And during this time, a lot of their indigenous local knowledge got suppressed. They weren't allowed to speak their language anymore. They weren't allowed to travel freely and all these kind of things. So a lot of traditional knowledge is also lost. So there aren't as many people in the community anymore who actively engage in subsistence practices. But there are efforts underway that this lost knowledge is being revitalized, and that people find back to their cultural practices and these kind of things.
And how are the practices being revived? How do they find the lost knowledge?
So there is it's called Cultural Center on the island, and there a few very engaged and ambitious and active community members are teaching Unangan Tunu classes. Unangan Tunu is the local language of the community, and there's only 2 people left who still speak it fluently. Yeah. And I spoke to one of them, Greg Freitas. For him, it's still his first language. And he also speaks English, but yeah, sometimes when he really wants to emphasize something and want to bring a point across, then he always speaks in Unangan Tunu. And I just realized how lonely he must feel. I mean, imagine there's only one person left on the whole planet who you can still speak your mother tongue to. And yeah, anyway, in this cultural center, they are teaching Unangan Tunu classes, but they are also hosting, for example, culture camps. One idea that came up during the workshop that we hosted this year was to bring people from the Aleutian chain to the island and let them teach the community, and because they still have knowledge about local plants and maybe specific food preparation techniques. So yeah, the community definitely has a desire to revitalize that knowledge and learn from their ancestors again. Yeah.
And what exactly does your research entail on the ground? Like when you're doing field work, what does that look like?
So in my research project, we're trying to understand what are the food security challenges people are encountering, and then how can we solve them. I came to the island, and then I, together with the community, built something that we called a transformation lab. And in that lab, we are listening to community concerns. We're listening to very different perspectives throughout the community. We're interviewing their tribal local government and all kinds of different stakeholders in the food system. And by doing that, we're really trying to get a whole picture of the food system with all its interconnections. And we're really trying to understand, how can we leverage change in the system? How can we really transform it? that at least some of the problems are resolved. And therefore we need to understand, okay, if we target an intervention here in the system, how does its effects then travel throughout the system? So that's what we're trying to understand.
Wow, that sounds very interesting. And you said you built a transformation lab, I think you called it. How did the community respond to that? Are they, excited for this kind of opportunity, or are they a bit reserved? What are their reactions, and how is it to work with them?
So I have to say that I have been very lucky because the community contacted us in the first place. So they really wanted to have the project there because they have so many challenges in their food system. And I feel very grateful for that because, well, I'm a white, young female researcher from Germany, from a place that is very far away from Alaska. And I would not have felt comfortable if I would have just gone into the community and said, hey, I'm here now, I'm going to solve all your problems. That really helped in just making sure that the community themselves, they also have an interest in the research project.
And so far, what would you say are some key insights that you've learned together with the community? And are there already things that you've implemented or really changed structurally?
So last year, when I went to St. Paul Island for the first time, I really focused on what are the problems. So to be honest, when I left St. Paul last year, I was quite depressed because everything I did over those 3 months was asking everyone, what are the challenges you encounter? What are the problems? But then this year, when I came back, I focused on the solutions. So, for example, I hosted a big scenario development workshop where the whole community was invited to join. I must admit that only 14 people joined, but they were very engaged. And together we co-created how a positive future for St. Paul Island could look like. And there it became clear that the community really wants to focus on their local resources, on what they have, not so much on what's going on globally. They don't want to necessarily export products, import products. They have lived off their subsistence resources for millennia. So they want to revitalize that knowledge, revitalize those activities. And at the same time, they would like to diversify their economy, because right now, pretty much all their revenue, the revenue that the community generates, comes from the fishing industry. And that is just not very sustainable in the long run, because, for example, they have been heavily invested in crab fishing, and the crab populations in the Bering Sea have been collapsing over the past years. So they need to diversify their economy to get less vulnerable to such changes. One of my main insights or impressions from this year's fieldwork really was that the community already has so much resilience, and they have local solutions. And for example, this year, they started a small community garden project. And traditionally or historically, they don't have a lot of knowledge about gardening or agriculture because it was just never part of their culture. But they are really starting to get into it and grow vegetables locally. And so just coming together with the community and thinking about how can a small initiative maybe become a bigger part of the food system and grow into the future so that they really support local food security and food sovereignty, that was really helpful. And I think really gave them a more positive outlook into the future.
Very interesting. And maybe you mentioned it already a little bit. You said local solutions, and that they're already very resilient, and that these are very important things to, I guess, make these solutions grow in a way. But what are some broader lessons or conclusions that you can take away from this more local exploration, let's say?
That's a super important question you just asked, and I should have an answer to it, and I will in the future. But right now, I'm still figuring that out. So it is a part of my research project, but I just feel like we're not there yet to fully answer it. I do think, though, I witnessed in the community that they have a few very strong advocates for community interests. A few people who speak up about community concerns and about their needs and hopes and desires. And I think that's what every community across the globe can benefit from. When there are a few people who, maybe listen to what people suffer from and be their voice, right? And speak up and, bring these issues to the broader attention so that other people can start thinking about solutions to these problems.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And how do you think that research can facilitate these changes further, but also where is like scientific aspects or like scientific research maybe lagging a bit? Where are like some downsides or some hurdles that stop you from implementing further changes maybe?
Yeah, that's also an interesting question. Because I think, when we're looking around us, there are so many crises going on, be it the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, wars, so much shit is going on. And there's a lot of misinformation at the same time. I don't know, if we open up social media, there's a lot of misinformation being spread, or also the right information wrongly being used. And I do think science has a very important role and is also responsible in bringing reliable, truthful information out there. At the same time, I personally feel that we know enough to know that we need to act. So in my research, I didn't necessarily want to further contribute to increasingly accurate predictions of how bad the future will be. But I rather wanted to contribute to solutions and to transformative change. So that's really where I still see, well, I think the majority of science that is being done right now is still, it's not doing that enough yet. And the ground science is also should still be there. And I'm very glad that many smart people are working on this. But I do think that there's still a big potential for science to create more actionable change and to work on issues that are really relevant for society, because we're running out of time. And that's what needs to be done.
You're talking about actionable change, and you're also an activist. So in your personal life, you're also doing activism with Greenpeace. How does that activism, for example, climbing on a shell platform in the North Sea, as seen recently, how does that translate into your research work, or how does it inform your research work? Do you think these two are interrelated or correlated in a way, or?
They definitely are. I think, before I really started doing research, I started with activism. So I've been with Greenpeace for 11 or 12 years now, I think. Well, no, I started in 2013, so 10 years. And after a few years, I started becoming a climbing activist. I joined the Greenpeace climbing team. So now when I'm doing activism, when I'm going on actions, I mostly do that as a climber. And I said this before, but I am aware of the crisis around us, of the state of emergency our planet is in. And I just don't want to fall into this mode of feeling paralyzed and feeling like I can't do anything, and just going out there and doing something really helps me to not lose hope and to at least feel like I'm a part of the solution and to meet like-minded people and speak to them. And I guess that's also what motivates my research, because my research is trying to leverage change in the real world. And I know that also sitting behind the laptop and analyzing data and writing and all these things are part of my research as well, and they need to be done. But to me, it was very important to also have a part in my research where I go outside and use my hands and use my body and speak to people and feel like I'm doing something.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when you're doing something and you go out there, like so far away to St. Paul Island, you told me before that you interviewed a lot of these community members. How was that? What did come out of it?
I got very diverse perspectives, I would say. So because I also interviewed different generations throughout the community. For example, I spoke to elders in the community. I spoke to middle-aged people. I spoke to subsistence providers, subsistence fishers, subsistence hunters, but also to local youth and kids. But what I found interesting is that across the generations, most people seem to have very similar visions of what they want their future to be like. For all of them, subsistence foods, traditional foods, and their own culture continues to be super important. But at the same time, all of them also want to have access to foods they historically haven't had access to. So, for example, fresh vegetables, salad, fruits, I don't know. For example, I went into the local school this summer and went into every single class. And I asked all the kids, hey, can you draw a picture for me of what you want to eat in the future?
Oh, wow.
And of course, you know, a lot of kids, they would draw marshmallows and candy mountains and, I don't know, gummy bear pizza.
Okay, wow.
But a lot of them also drew a seal, a reindeer, or exotic fruits that you normally wouldn't find in the local store, like a watermelon or a banana or something. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
That's really cute. Interesting. I think that's really impressive to have an overview of what different generations in the same community want, and then realizing that actually they all want similar things at the end of the day. I think that's very interesting. And how do you plan to bring these messages out there in the world, or how do you plan to translate your findings into something tangible for non-scientists?
So actually there are two things we're working on right now. So the first thing is that next year we will go back into the community and have a meeting with the local tribal government and representatives of the different entities. So for example, there is a city council and the local school and all these kind of people who have a little bit more power over the system to change something. And what we're going to do is we're going to present those people the positive vision of the future that we co-created this year with the community, mm-hmm. and be like, hey, this is what the community wants. Now please make this happen. Yeah. And in this workshop, we are going to develop something that we call pathways to sustainability. So we will have the vision here, and then we will together think about, okay, in the current system, what needs to shrink, what needs to grow, what needs to be done, what are steps and actions to be taken to, you know, maybe not fully arrive there, but to get a step closer, to make at least some parts of it become reality. And then the other thing is that we are currently working on a podcast. In the podcast, or for the podcast, I also did a lot of different interviews with different community members this year. And over the course of 4 different episodes, we're trying to bring out there or explain to the community, but also the general public, what the research project is about, and make it more understandable for everyone, and also communicate our findings, for example. But at the same time, we also want to let the local people speak and, just tell the story of the Singapore Island food system to pretty much everyone who's interested. And I do think that is important because in the past, especially when we think about research with indigenous communities, oftentimes researchers just came into those communities, extracted all the data that they wanted, and then they left, and people never heard anything about it again. And unfortunately, the academic system is still structured in a way that this is what is expected from you, and everything, if you want to do it differently or some extra work, you have to do it in your free time, kind of. But we really wanted to do that, and it was important to us. So with the podcast, we're trying to also give something back to the community. And I hope people will appreciate it or listen to it.
That's super nice. Yeah, I'm curious to hear it. I will definitely listen into it. Where are we going to be able to hear it? And in general, where can we follow more of your work? Do you have any channels?
I do have an Instagram channel. I'm not super active on it, but my name is silja.sapiens. And the podcast is going to be published on Spotify and also on my university website, for example. I mean, normally this would have all been on Twitter, but Twitter is kind of dead right now. And we haven't really found, because scientific Twitter was huge, but we haven't really found an alternative yet.
Mm-hmm. Anything else that you think people should know about indigenous communities and their food security? Anything you'd like to share?
I think what is important to me the most to say, thinking about, and maybe this is mostly a message to other researchers who also work in or with indigenous communities. I think it is so important that we as white researchers from very different contexts don't come with our own readily prepared research agendas into these communities and be like, okay, this is what I got funding for and this is the project I'm going to do now, but that we really listen to the concerns of the local people and also let them lead or co-lead the research project. And that is not always easy. And I'm 100% sure also in my project, we're doing a lot of mistakes there. And it's definitely not perfect the way we're doing it, but we're trying to. And I think that can be done, for example, by at least hiring a local research assistant. That's something what we did, for example. To just make sure and to be in like constant conversation, and also, be open to maybe changing your research question a little bit or changing your methods to something that is really locally and culturally appropriate.
If you look to the future, what is the vision of the future that in terms of food systems or food security that you'd like to see? If you could just imagine anything, what would it be?
Oh, I think if I think about the perfect food system, maybe not only for the community there, but in general, I would really hope that that the food we eat and the production system around the food does not destroy our planet anymore. Because right now, the food systems across the world, locally and globally, are really unjust, unsustainable systems. And I really think that needs to change. Yeah.
Definitely needs to change.
Yeah.
And you're a big part of it, making it happen, I would say. That was a very interesting interview. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us and yeah, we encourage all the viewers to definitely check out Silja's channels and follow along with news about the podcast. And also, if you're interested in Indigenous food security, definitely check out fairplanet.org for more articles on that topic. We also have articles on the Arctic specifically. So yeah, we're pretty sure you're going to find more information in all these sources that I just mentioned.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the invitation. It was fun to talk to you.